All right, my name is Melanie Leggett, and I'm a program manager at Adventures in Good Company. And I have been working with our land Galapagos trip since I started here. So we're about to go on our second round of that trip. And I think the entire time that we've been running this land-based Galapagos trip, we've had a lot of women interested in having a boat trip, which is really the classic way to see the Galapagos. And so over the past year, I worked with Tatiana, who's going to be my co-host this morning, on putting together a boat trip for us. And we're really excited to have our first AGC trip exploring the Galapagos Islands by yacht this spring. So I will let Tatiana introduce herself a little bit, but she works with the company that we're using, which is called Enchanted Expeditions. And her mom owns the company, and she is her mom's right-hand woman, and is coming from the Galapagos today. So her Wi-Fi may be spotty, and it's a miracle that she even has Wi-Fi calling from there. So do you want to say hi, Tatiana?
Hi, my name is Tatiana, and I'm basically putting this trip together in Galapagos for you. As Melanie mentioned, my mother founded this company 40 years ago. So we've been doing this a long time, and it'd be really nice to host all of you.
Great. And we are so excited to work with their company. They feel like a really perfect fit for us, which I think is why we're finally doing this. You know, they're a small company and they're female owned, which we really love. So it just seems like a really kind of serendipitous connection that we're excited to do together. All right, I'm going to get started over here. So here's our agenda for this morning. We already did the housekeeping, so you're all muted, but we'll take you off at the end for questions. Right into that chat box down at the bottom if you have a question or if you have any sort of problem, and we can try and troubleshoot that with you. And then after that, we're going to go into the introduction just of the Galapagos itself and a brief overview of the whole trip and the different sections of the trip. And we'll dive a little bit more into our specific itinerary when we're on the boat. And then we'll look at the yacht itself and give a little bit more details into what that will look like, and the activities that you'll be doing every day when you're on board. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A. All right. So our trip, I mentioned our first trip will be this spring. So it's May 6th to 15th. We do still have some spaces available. And the trip itself has 3 distinct phases to it. So it starts with 2 nights in Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador, and then 7 nights on the yacht. And then there's an optional 3-night extension at what's called the Galapagos, the Enchanted Galapagos Lodge. So we'll start with talking about Quito. Quito is the capital, like I mentioned, and we go there really for 2 purposes. So it's a multi-purpose section of the trip. The first is so that we can gather everybody. We want to make sure everybody gets there, and that if there's any flight delays or problems like that, you've got a little bit of time to gather as a group before we fly all together to the Galapagos. So part of it is just purely for that reason. Also, if people are on different time zones, it's nice to have a little bit of time to adjust before we head out to the islands. And the second reason is that Quito is just a really great place to visit. So I think we could probably build an entire trip around going to Quito. It's a UNESCO World Heritage City. It has a really beautiful old town, which I will be staying in. And it's right on the equator. So all kinds of interesting things to explore on that section. But basically what will happen is you'll fly into the airport. You'll be met there. So we'll be able to provide transportation. It's about a 30-minute drive from the airport into the city itself. We'll be staying at a really beautiful little boutique hotel. And we'll gather that night. And then the next day we'll do a city tour. And we will also explore the equator. So we'll go to the equator and do some experiments and things like that and see what that's all about. Have another group dinner together, 1 more night at that hotel, and then the next day we'll go out to the islands. Tatiana, do you have anything you want to add about the Quito portion?
No, I think that's, yeah, no, that pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
1 full day and 2 nights, yeah.
Great. And this whole trip, you'll be with an Adventures in Good Company guide, as always, of course, and then also local guides. So we'll have a local guide for the Quito portion of this trip who will be taking us on our city tour. And then we'll get to the part that everybody is waiting for and the reason people come on this trip, of course, the Galapagos themselves. So I'm sure you're all quite familiar with the Galapagos, but they're about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. And they're a group of islands. There's about 127 different islands, rocks, things like that. But 4 really main ones that are inhabited. And we'll be visiting some of those. And the really special thing about the Galapagos is that because it's so isolated, it has a lot of really incredible just wildlife in general, but also specifically endemic wildlife. So wildlife that you can really only see by going to the Galapagos. So that's, the main reason that people travel there. And here's our itinerary. So we'll fly in on day 1. So it'll be an early morning and we'll go to the airport and fly out to the Galapagos. You land in Baltra right here. I don't know if you, I think you can see my cursor. And we'll spend that day on Santa Cruz in the Highlands and going to the Charles Darwin Research Station. Day 2, we'll go out to Sombrero Chino and Rabida Island. And then day 3, we'll head over to Isabella. And then we'll spend day 3 through day 6 kind of hopping along the west side of Isabella, which is a really neat area. That's somewhere we don't go on our land trip. So we'll head along this west side and then back to Santiago and then eventually back to Santa Cruz. At that point, you'll be able to either fly back to Quito if you're not doing the extension, or you might choose to stay on for the next 3 nights for the extension portion of the trip, which is at a lodge in the Santa Cruz Highlands, which I think, Tatiana, I don't know if you're calling from there, but I know you're there quite a bit.
Yeah, I do go up there quite regularly.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to just talk about this itinerary in particular and what you think is great about it?
This one, I personally really like this one because Western Isabella is not only the youngest area of the islands, but it's the most remote area. So once you get over there, you really do feel like you're completely away from everything. And it's the only way to get there is on a liveaboard boat. So once you're there, it's really quite special. And there's a lot of penguins and tortoises, and there's just lots to see over on that side.
And we can get more into specifics when you all have Q&A at the end if there's certain questions you have about what we'll see and where we'll see it. It's also really detailed online on our itinerary for each day. All right. So the activities, what will you be doing? And this is mostly focusing on, of course, the activities during that boat portion of our trip. So that 7 nights on the yacht. So different things you might be doing. Each day you'll get a briefing from the guides, and I'm going to have Tatiana go through just sort of a typical day on board. So she'll talk about that. A lot of nature walks and wildlife viewing. Photography, that's just optional, but a lot of people, of course, do a lot of photography while they're there. Dinghy excursions, so using dinghies to get into bays that you might not be able to access otherwise. Hikes. So there's a lot of nature walks, and then there's a few things that I would classify more as hikes, and we can talk about that a little more too. Snorkeling, I would say, is the main activity on this, snorkeling in those nature walks. And then some kayaking is available, and then downtime, of course, on board. Tatiana, do you want to talk a little more about what a typical day might look like?
Yeah, I'll run through, say what a general day would look like. Of course, there's like small changes from day to day, but most of the time you would have breakfast, say around 7, and then at 8 a.m. you disembark. So you go on your first nature excursion, which is usually a walk. Sometimes it might be some hiking. You'd spend maybe 2.5 hours on land with your guide, visiting the wildlife, seeing what's there, and then you come back to the boat. And usually this is a short break. So you quickly change into your snorkeling gear, have a quick snack, and then you get in the dinghy, and then you'll go on your first snorkeling excursion, which is usually close to the morning visiting site. And then you'll snorkel directly from the dinghy, like jump overboard and do some snorkeling, and then you come back to the boat in time for lunch. After lunch, the boat will move to the next site. So this is usually a short sailing, definitely under 2 hours. But that's generally a good time to either have a nap or sit on deck and look for whales or read. Usually a nap is much needed. And then around 2:30, say 3 p.m., again, depends on the day, you go on shore for a second land visit. Sometimes this could be a dinghy ride depending on the day, but most days it's a land visit. And depending on the site, there would be a second option for snorkeling or kayaking. Then you'll come back to the boat in time for sunset. And then dinner is around 7. And then after dinner, you'll have a guide briefing and presentation. And then usually everyone's going straight to bed.
Thanks. All right. I should add, I think it's totally appropriate on this trip, and Tatiana, maybe you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. If you're a beginning snorkeler, if you've never snorkeled before, if you've never kayaked before, I think that is all okay. What do you say?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, okay. Definitely. So we've had lots of snorkelers who, or maybe first-time snorkelers, but the crew and the guide is very accommodating. So we've had people that can barely swim and they can use a life ring. We'll do whatever possible because the life underwater is really, so it's nice not to miss that.
Thanks. So the boat itself, we are using a yacht called Beluga. So our boat's called Beluga. It will be just us on this boat, so just your AGC group plus the crew. And it's fully air conditioned, it's spacious, and it's comfortable. It has 6 shared double cabins and 1 single supplement cabin. They each have a private bath and hot showers, a dining cabin with panoramic windows, and a sun deck so that you can enjoy the views and the stars, and our own private chef. And I'm just going to go to the next page where you can see some photos so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So really beautiful boat, private, personal, and comfortable. Tatiana, do you want to add a little more about the boat itself or the crew that will be there or anything like that?
Yeah, so the boat is comfortable. It's perfect for like this kind of a group where you have exclusivity on the boat. There's enough spaces that people can spread out and have a little space from each other if they need. And the crew, are, as I said before, they're very accommodating. So with you, you'll have your naturalist guide who's there the entire time. And alongside that, there will be 7 other crew members that are taking care of the boat and looking after everyone's needs during their time on board.
Can you talk a little bit about the chef and the food?
Yeah, so the chef, it's basically, I guess what you would call like home style meals. So everything is served on the table and everyone serves their own plates. But the chef is very accommodating to any kind of dietary restrictions anyone has. Or if you have any kind of requests or certain types of meals that you would like to have on board, if you sent that information ahead of time, you can do that. But generally, it would be one meal prepared for everyone, except for those who have dietary restrictions would have alternatives prepared for them.
All right. And then after the boat is docked back at Santa Cruz, then we have this option for the extension. And so that's something we're really excited about. The yacht trip, our hope is that it will actually feel more restful and relaxing than our land-based trip might, because you're doing most of your traveling at night when you're sleeping, and you're doing most of your eating on board, things like that. So there's just a little less hustle and bustle maybe than the land trip where you're moving from hotel to hotel and changing a lot. But it's still really busy. It's still going to be tiring. I'm sure you're going to be doing a lot each day. And so the extension is really a chance to relax. It's at a beautiful lodge up in the Santa Cruz Highlands with beautiful rooms and pools and great dining, and just in a really beautiful location. So it'll give you a chance to relax before your big trip back home. But it also gives you a chance to really immerse yourself in one part of the Galapagos and maybe get to experience a little more what local life is like, and just spend time culturally getting to know an area with a little bit more time and depth than you get to when you're hopping around on the yacht. So I'd say the first part's definitely wildlife based, and then this part is maybe a little bit more like cultural based and getting to know an area really well. And it also has some great activities. So again, the full itinerary is available online on our website for the page for this trip. But there's a biking day, which I might have Tatiana talk about in a little more detail, because I know some people love biking, some people not so much. But this is a great kind of mellow option. And there's a hike that you can do during this part, and then also a chance to visit some local artisans and visit the towns a little bit more. And I'd say this part can also be a little more customized to you. So if you just want to rest by the pool and read your book, great. If you want to really pack this part full of activities too, we can do that. So Tatiana, do you want to, and I should add, this is also owned by the company Enchanted Expeditions and Tatiana's family. So it's all part of that company that we're working with. Tatiana, do you want to talk a little more about the lodge and the itinerary there?
Yeah. So yeah, it's basically what you mentioned, but the first day after you get off the boat, that's the day of biking. And it's not a hard bike ride. In fact, it's very easy. It's mostly downhill. And if anyone didn't want to bike, they could go in a support vehicle. So you would bike down to this beautiful beach, which is called Garapetero, and then from there you can do some kayaking, which again can be optional. Somebody just wants to sit on the beach and do nothing, that's fine too. But it is not, I wouldn't say it's a strenuous activity by any means. And then you come back to the hotel and relax. And the second day, you have a hike to what would be the highest point on the island. But again, it's not a strenuous hike. It takes maybe 3 hours total up and down. And if anyone wanted to skip out on that, they can. And then the rest of the day is more, as you were saying, like cultural activities, going to town, visiting a wood carver, visiting a chocolate maker. And the last day is completely open to what anyone wants to do.
Great. And then can you just talk about the lodge itself too? Maybe a little bit about the cheese factory or whatever you would call it, and amenities at the lodge.
Yeah. So the lodge is located on quite a large piece of land. A lot of it is used by the neighbor for cattle, but the part where the hotel is on is mostly farmland. And so it has a really nice forest trail, has a lot of gardens, has a lot of space, pool, a deck, and a hammock area. And a lot of the food that is served there is either grown on the farm there or on a farm nearby. So it is really just a nice place to decompress. And we do have this little, which anyone is welcome to visit as well, this little cheese factory that my husband and I started during the pandemic as a pandemic project. And it ended up going well. So we make artisanal cheeses in-house as well, which you'll be sampling while you're there too.
Great. Thanks. And again, it's called the Enchanted Galapagos Lodge. So if you're curious and you want to take a look at it after this, feel free. Okay. Oh, I feel like a slide got missed. Oh, here we go. Why choose the yacht trip? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why you may want to choose this trip versus our land trip, and then also why you might want to choose to go with us versus a different company. That we know there's a lot of different Galapagos boat trips out there, of course. We think ours is going to be the best, and we'll talk about why. But first, we also offer, of course, our land trip, which is great. And we've done it for many years and we'll continue to do it for years. I think that trip is such a great option, of course, if you don't like boats and you don't want to be on a boat all the time. Some people, that may not be their cup of tea. But if you are excited to explore that part, we feel like traveling by boat is just the best way to really get to explore the islands and the wildlife and everything that the Galapagos has to offer, because it can just get you to places that you can't get to on the land trip. So just wildlife viewing opportunities and landscape viewing opportunities, that sort of thing, are a little bit more abundant on this version of our Galapagos trip. I also mentioned it's nice that you travel mostly at night. So you do the big part of your motoring while you're asleep. So it's just an exciting thing to wake up each day in a different location and be able to eat your breakfast and look out the windows and go up on deck and see where you are now and go and explore those areas. It cuts down on the hustle and bustle of needing to travel each day. And then, of course, the reason I think to do our trip versus other boat trips when there's so many great ones to choose from are probably the reasons a lot of you choose AGC already, but we will be sending our own guide as well as having the expert naturalist guide with us. And so you'll have somebody from AGC who's there really just to take care of the group. So to make sure you are having the most fun time possible on your trip, which is always our goal. So everybody's getting along well, everyone feels included, and everybody has everything they need. You know, if you need earplugs, if you need something different to eat, our AGC guide is there just to help make sure all of that stuff happens. And then we have all of the great Galapagos guides to really introduce you to the area. And then also that it's just such a small group. I think that's a really rare opportunity to have a small boat and a group of 12 women. And so that's most of the reason. Also, our trip has done a really good job of including a lot of the extra costs and add-ons that other companies might not. So when you're comparing us to other trips, if you're doing that, there's things like the flight, for example, from Quito to the Galapagos in our trip, that's all included, whereas in a lot of the other companies, it's not. So just know that sort of thing when you're comparing, that ours is pretty much show up and we will take care of everything else. So that's that. Tatiana, do you have anything to add about why visit the Galapagos via boat versus a more land-based trip?
Like as you said, I think it is a little bit of a personal choice, like your comfort level with being on a boat. But I do think the experience of being on the boat, if you're willing to do it, is in terms of wildlife is far better. So you spend much more time on shore, much more time snorkeling, more time viewing the wildlife, and you wake up in the morning and you're a different island every day. So all that traveling has been done. And aside from that, a lot of the islands that you visit on a liveaboard cruise are not accessible on a day tour boat. So you do get to see a lot more if wildlife were the priority. And again, what I usually recommend is if you have the time is to do the cruise and then spend a couple days in town to get the more like local cultural side of things.
Great. Yeah. All right. This is just the last page here. So that's me. I'm not in the Galapagos. I kind of look like I am. And that's my email, melaniel@goodadventure.com. And if you have any follow-up questions after we end today, or if you have any questions specifically for Tatiana, I'd be happy to share those with her. So, and of course, you can just call the AGC office as well. Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Great, Judy, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, it's probably more for Tatiana. How much has climate change impacted the Galapagos Islands, would you say? I know that's probably a pretty loaded question and hard to answer.
Yeah, it's definitely not my area of expertise, but so far the Galapagos have not really been impacted by climate change, especially regarding like coral and marine life and wildlife on land. And I think it's mainly because we do have some very cold currents that travel through the islands for half of the year, coming up from the Antarctic. What does impact or has impacted here, say, as long as I have known, is when you have these weather systems like El Nino. So weather systems such as El Nino have definitely impacted the islands. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years because things are really kicking up with climate change. But for example, this year we have been affected by El Nino. It's a lot warmer right now than it normally is. And I'm sure it's going to be warm up until February, March. So yeah, the warm water, if anything, it affects more the sea life. There's less algae, things like that. But usually it recovers. It's like part of this natural phenomenon. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Tatiana, can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how you came to own a cheese factory in the lodge?
Well, the lodge, together with my mother and other family members, we acquired the lodge just before the pandemic, actually. So it was really bad timing. We thought it would be nice to complement to like the cruise option. And then the pandemic hit and we had nothing to do. So, and my stepdad comes from a Swiss cheese making family. And he got stuck here in the pandemic because there were no flights, along with my mother. So I basically forced him to teach me how to make cheese. And so, yeah, my husband and I got that going and we really got into it. So we're still doing it. Yeah.
I have a question about I get mild like seasickness. I'm okay like on a bigger cruise, but I didn't know if it's an option for somebody that gets seasickness.
We get a lot of people ask that. I would say 50%. They're worried about the seasickness. Generally, it's not been a big problem. What we recommend is if you can take seasickness medication before dinner, before you go to bed, and you'll probably be fine. So far, it worked. We haven't had any bad cases.
This is Jane. I have a boat question too. I've vacationed on a smaller boat once before and tried to travel at night, and the boat noise, the motor noise made it difficult to sleep. What's it like in your boat at night?
There's definitely, I mean, it's basically like a moving city. So there's always a generator running, and at night or when the boat's traveling, there is background noise. It's a personal thing. I think for some people it affects them more than others. It's not terribly loud. I would say bring
earplugs. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there will be a generator running most of the night then, I would assume.
Yes, the generator runs all day because that's how the lights, the power.
Okay. Maybe this is a question for Julie or Melanie. Are there any more single supplements available?
You know that there's only one single supplement on this trip, you may have noticed. So right now that one is spoken for. However, if we get closer to the trip and the boat isn't completely full, I could see us opening up another single or two. But right now they're spoken for.
Okay.
Tatiana, could you tell us maybe just a few of the wildlife highlights of what you might see on this trip?
Yeah. So basically on all liveaboard cruises, you're going to see the typical Galapagos wildlife, the sea lions, the marine iguanas, the land iguanas, the frigate birds, blue-footed boobies, finches, I mean, and on and on and on. But in this one particularly, you'll see a lot more penguins. Basically all the penguins are on the western side of Isabela. And by a lot, I don't mean like hundreds. Galapagos is a small population of penguins, but most of them are there. You'll see the flightless cormorant, which is another bird that's endemic to Galapagos and is only in this part of the islands. You'll have a better chance of you'll see tortoises no matter what at the tortoise reserve, but it's a better chance of seeing tortoises in the wild. And also a lot more reptiles. So like, for example, on Fernandina Island, you'll just be like carpets of marine iguanas. There's so many of them. Yeah. And excellent snorkeling because the water is colder in this part. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So are wetsuits or any other thing like that needed for snorkeling? I've always snorkeled in very warm water.
Yes. So through the channel between Isabel and Fernandina, there's a very cold current that travels through there, which is why you get the penguins and really good snorkeling, better chance of seeing whales. But no matter where you are in the islands, I would recommend using at least a shorty wetsuit, just because you can stay more time in the water and there's a lot to see. May will be towards the end of the hot season, so the water is still a little bit warmer. But if you were concerned about being cold, like the boat has wetsuits, but the shorty ones that go to your elbows and knees. But if you're concerned about cold, I would bring maybe a skin to put under it, and that way you'll be more comfortable.
Okay, so the boat does have the shorty wetsuits for us, and all the snorkeling gear.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
Snorkeling gear, yeah, mask, snorkels, fins, and the shorty wetsuits.
Okay, thank you.
Can you talk about the weather?
The weather?
Yeah.
Is that what you
What
said?
the weather is like, what the temperature of the weather,
So yeah, the weather's, as I said before, it's a little funny right now because it's particularly warm. I always say May is my favorite month. Next year it might be a little warmer, I would say, than other years because this Nino thing is happening, which generally warms things up a bit. But May is usually a transition month. So it's usually still quite sunny, not a lot of rain. The water is starting to cool down. So generally, I find it one of the most pleasant months. So let's hope that it's like that next year.
We're going to wrap this up, but again, you can reach out to me or the HCC office with any more questions. We're happy to answer anything, and we can also pass things on to Tatiana anytime. And thank you all so much for coming, and I hope that some of you choose to travel with us on the boat this year. Have a great day.
All right, bye.